with Andy Clarke. One of my, well, not to be too much of a fan by beer, but one of our favourite boxing pundits, Andy. So thanks so much for joining us today.
No problem.
You did, and you said that you're also a massive cricket and football fan. So I was just wondering, from a fan perspective, how would you rank the three sports, mate? Would boxing be the number one or not?
Yeah, but boxing would be. When I was a kid, it would have been cricket. That was what I kind of first got really obsessed with. My dad was a big cricket fan. I've got an older brother, 2 years older. We were introduced to sport straight away, really, and both really loved it. And that was football too. You know, boxing wasn't as present when I was younger because it wasn't in schools, and it just didn't really present itself as being something that I would actually do. I did have some gloves. Not that much percentage in that, to be honest. When your only potential sparring partner is your older brother, that ends one way. So yeah, the boxing kind of just grew on me the older I got, really. And then when I got into doing what I'm doing now, I always wanted to work in boxing, but you've got to learn how to do the job first. And that meant doing a lot of football, which was no hardship. I really enjoyed it, but I was always looking to get into what I'm doing now.
Is it right you didn't sort of enjoy the researching, you know, I don't know, say like West Brom v Villa on a Saturday? He wasn't a massive fan of doing the research. Is that right?
Yeah, that's pretty much how it went. So when I was at TalkSport, which I was for about 10 years, I covered loads. I did cover some other sports, bits and pieces of boxing, but it was 90% football, and it was brilliant. Like, I was going to Arsenal, Spurs, Chelsea, Premier League, Champions League. I went to tournaments. It was amazing. But when you're reporting on it, you don't need to do it in that much depth. It's kind of broader strokes, and you'd be going to a game every other day or whatever, and it was fantastic. Commentating's different. Like, you need to go into it in much more depth. And I realised probably after about a season that, and it wasn't through me being lazy or anything, I really pushed myself to do it. I realised that, to my kind of surprise, really, that I didn't love it as much as I thought I did. And you know that there's kind of a ceiling as to what you're going to achieve if that's the case, because you have to genuinely love that side of it. And then when I started commentating on boxing, it was completely the other way. So, you know, from that point onwards, I realised that, you know, you can try and do two sports. People have tried to do it before, but it doesn't really work. If you want to really get to a good level, you have to choose. I always find it slightly mystifying whereas in the States, you know, they're much more kind of, the all-rounder thing is much more of a thing. Like, you know, like Joe Tessitore for ESPN, for example, good commentator, not knocking him at all, but he does NFL and boxing, doesn't he?
Basketball and everything as well, isn't he?
Like, to me, he will always be boxing for me, but I know he has a show now, doesn't he, where he's an expert on basically everything, as far as I can work out. And I don't see how that. I personally, I don't get that. I don't see how that can work, really.
Yeah. Well, Andy, it's been a difficult year, and sport, as everything else has been affected by that. But within boxing, we've certainly seen the likes of Eddie and Matchroom and other promoters as well, striving to keep the sport going as best as possible. I just want to get your thoughts on, I mean, how impressed have you been with the efforts, I mean, with the fight camps, for example, of the likes of Eddie to keep the sport running as best as possible, mate?
I think the fight camp was massively impressive. You know, when you kind of wandered through the front gates and got tested and that, and then temperature checked and then went in, it was pretty epic. You know, when you saw it just plonked there, and the cards were good, and the weather held up. There was one week where it was absolutely boiling hot, and then I think for the pay-per-view it was actually quite cold, but the weather held up. I think they were thinking about doing it there for a bit longer, and then realised that by that point you're heading into September, and it probably wasn't the best idea. But no, but that was really imaginative, and I think they'll probably do it again. The thing is, when we don't have to have those kinds of restrictions, because it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. And then going around some different venues first, and then landing at Wembley Wembley Arena for the last few weeks. That was good too. They set it up really, really well, and I think they got as much out of it as they could. And I covered some Frank Warren cards for TalkSport too, and I mean they did a lot of shows, and the headline fights, they had some good fights. They had some good cards as well. I think everybody did well with it. Channel 5 have had some decent cards. You know, that was a really good fight they had the other night. Shaqan Peters and Craig Richards. Plenty of people.
Yeah, great fight. That was really good.
Yeah, I know Matchroom would have wanted that on one of their shows, definitely. And it's been, everybody's kind of showed their, you know, imaginative side. I mean, a good pal of mine is Al Siesta, and he's been doing shows in Belarus. Like, he's been taking communication fighters over to Belarus for his Cold Wars. And again, you know, that's not everybody could do that. You know, he's got like unbelievable contacts, but it's just stuff like that. You know, it's kind of, boxing's always been used to being fairly unloved, hasn't it? You know, no one's ever really cared about us, to be honest, as a sport, and people every now and again will choose to have a dig, and you know, you have to, everybody who's worked in it, they know they've got to make their own strides. No one's going to do them any favors, and the government included. Anthony Joshua's just stepped up, which is awesome. But there's a lot of resourceful people in boxing, is what I'm saying. And so if anyone's going to react well in a crisis, it's boxing.
Yeah.
Has there been a particular card, Andy, that, you know, I know there's obviously, like you said, you've covered loads. Has there been one though that stuck out to you, maybe fight camp one or residency one, or has there been a particular night that's you've been like, do you know what, I think that was the best one so far this year?
I think it was probably the pay-per-view, the White Povetkin card, just because it had Taylor Pursoon on it, which was another really good fight. Zach Shelley, Jack Cullen, that was a good fight. Chris Congo, Luther Clay, again, that was a good fight. And then the top of the bill just delivered something completely unexpected, which wasn't what you know, Matchroom would have wanted. But that's what's great about boxing. You really don't know. You know, you think you do most of the time, but sometimes you really don't know. And to get an away win in a main event is never a bad thing, I don't think, because it just shows that you're making proper fights, you're making competitive fights. So probably that one, and because, you know, it was in that setting as well. Yeah, I really enjoyed that one. But Wembley was a good venue too. Usyk Chisora was, you know, it's always good seeing a fight like that close up. I found that was an interesting watch.
Yeah, definitely. And I think another positive we've seen as well within boxing through the pandemic situation we've been through is the continuous rise of women's boxing. I mean, talk to us about that triple header we had, world title fights. I mean, years ago we wouldn't have seen that. It's so good to see now. I'm sure you'll agree, Andy.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, Taylor Pursoon was fight camp. We had some great fights in fight camp. Jonas Harper, I think, that stood out for me too. That previous question you asked, that was a brilliant fight. That was a really brilliant fight. Rachel Ball, Shannon Courtney was a good fight. Taylor Pursoon. So that kind of set it all up, and that put it all in motion to be able to do that kind of card, because those fights were so good. And it is, you know, the development of women's boxing is a really interesting one, because it's one of those situations where people have to understand that there is still a way to go, because the participation levels aren't the same as they are for the men. Hence, the strength and depth isn't the same as it is for the men. But what everybody has to realize and has to understand is that they're two separate sports. You know, sometimes when when the profile of women's sport in a particular sport rises, everybody gets obsessed with trying to work out how good are they compared to the men, which is a completely pointless exercise. But people have done it in football. They don't do it quite so much in boxing, but that's what they're always kind of driving at, is, you know, are they as good as the men? Well, there's no valid comparison to be made. You just got to enjoy it as a spectacle for what it is and the skill level that's there. And you know, we've seen some brilliant fights. I mean, the three on that night weren't that competitive, in that Taylor had a mandatory, and Taylor's that good that her mandatories mostly will be people that she'll beat easily. Like, she's had 2 mandatories since she started winning titles. Kimberly Connor and Miriam Gutierrez. And I did see some comments on the night saying, "Oh, you know, this isn't a proper fight. This isn't a good fight." But you have to, you know, mandatories are there for the reason, and you have to do them. It's it's. I just hope that people are patient with it. That's all, because you are going to get the odd contest which isn't that great because there's a bit too much of a golfing class. But that'll change. You know, that'll change over time. And one really good thing is that they are willing to move around the weights and take the big fights. They're not scared of losing unbeaten records. Those top females, they're really not. And the promoters have taken that attitude with them as well. And that's brilliant, because like Eddie Hearn's always talking about, you know, with women's boxing, we can aim for one recognised or undisputed champion in each division. There's no reason why we can't do that. And that makes it, you know, that's definitely something to shoot for, because I think that keeps people interested when they know who the best person is.
Yeah,
would you still put Katie Taylor as number one? Obviously, Terry Harper was just voted. I think she was voted BBC Fighter of the Year. You've got Savannah Marshall. Obviously, you've got Clarissa Shields. You've got Jonas has, you know, put herself back in the mix. Would you still have Katie though as number one?
World number one, did you say?
Just number one, you would say, you know, as the recognised sort of, you know, lead.
I mean, I think it's definitely between her and Shields. I mean, Shields hasn't boxed, has she, as far as I know, since in this kind of COVID era. I mean, before that, I do the Sky rankings, and before that, to be honest, I'm not really a big believer in pound for pound. I think that it's a bit of a cliche, but there are weight divisions for a reason. And why do you need to compare two fighters who are never going to fight, and they're never going to fight for a really good reason? That it's quite fun. So I understand why people do it, but I don't really see the point of it particularly. But if I had to do like pound for pound rankings, I would at that point have put Shields above Taylor, because she'd been undisputed in one division and unified in two others, and just weight of achievement, Taylor hasn't done that. So that would be why I would have had her ahead. But since then, Taylor's, you know, boxed twice and Shields hasn't. So I think it's a toss-up between those two, really, as to who's the best. But there's other fighters, you know, emerging and coming through, and that's, you know, that's a very interesting aspect to it. I would still really like to see Taylor fight Amanda Serrano. They had that done for May, didn't they? For that show that was supposed to be in May, and then it got kicked back to fight camp, and they couldn't agree on money, and it went away. But I would still like to see that. I mean, Taylor's amazing. You know, I get the feeling that she'll box for as long as she possibly can, because I think contemplating life after boxing for her is probably quite hard, sort of borderline unthinkable. She's been doing it for so long. But I mean, I would love to see her have like 4 or 5 more and then get out. But I don't think she will. So somebody will beat her at some point, because she'll probably go on a bit too long. But I don't like that. That's never a problem for me. Like, people look at fighters like Roy Jones and say, "Oh, he's diminishing his legacy" and all the rest of it. And I understand what they're saying, but not for me. You know, I just remember him at his best. Same with other people. You know, everybody generally does go on a little bit too long. The odd person gets it absolutely right, like Joe Calzaghe or some others. But the timing of it is difficult, isn't it? But Taylor, I'd love to see Taylor kind of. I don't want to see her get beat just because she goes in with someone who's too big or because she gets too old. But I'm pretty sure that's going to happen.
Andy, I wanted to ask you, obviously, about your role and your job working within Sky. I mean, if there is a difficult part to that job, or maybe a frustrating part, is probably better to describe it. After you've worked the show, and sometimes you log yourself onto social media, and you can see some of the comments. I mean, we've heard things quite recently about people talking up about biased commentary and things. I mean, does it affect you personally, or do you just sort of let it go over your head, mate?
It doesn't really affect me. No, it's. I think I'm kind of quite lucky in that I'm just sort of naturally, if you like, the way I'm wired, that kind of thing
Yeah.
doesn't really bother me. It doesn't. That's not to say that it won't get a reaction. Like I might read something and think, what a prick, or I might,
Yeah.
you know, it'll get a reaction, but it won't stay with me. You know, I'll move on from it very, very quickly. And I think that is just luck. I think that is just down to how you are as a person. I can't claim any credit for that. I've just kind of always been like that. And I think that's one of the reasons that I'm sort of suited to doing this, because I mean, I do know quite a few colleagues who they're not like that. They take things more personally. They're a bit more sensitive than me, which is probably better for them in other areas of their life. But in this particular one, probably is a bit of a, you know, slightly inconvenient. I do wonder sometimes, you know, I feel for them because, you know, it doesn't sound too patronizing, but I do feel for them because that must take some of the enjoyment out of it. If it's that one negative comment that is the one that kind of you remember, and that's the one that sticks with you, then that must be difficult. But no, I find it okay. You know, it's what you've always got to remember when people are talking about bias and stuff like that is that almost everybody who watches a fight does have some kind of agenda or allegiance. Not always, but if you're going to be moved to comment on social media, you probably have, because you don't like what I've said about your guy. I haven't been positive enough about your guy, or I've been a bit too positive about the other one who you don't want to win. So I don't think you can ever really pay too much attention to it. But it is something that I do think about a lot, because it's really important to try and make sure that you don't have any kind of even unconscious agenda going into a fight. So you've got to be completely even-handed about everything you do in terms of your research and your and the way you look at it, because I've watched fights before where I know all the commentators involved, and I know that they don't care who wins that fight. I know that they're not biased in any way, shape, or form, but I'm listening to what they're saying, and it sounds like they are, because they're just talking about one more than the other, maybe because they know a bit more about one than the other. So it can happen to anybody if you're not really careful.
I want to get your opinions on coming to last weekend's fight that we just watched now. Got to ask you about Canelo Alvarez. I mean, his performance last weekend was outstanding. I mean, how good was he? Arguably, maybe his best performance to date we've seen from him. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I thought he was. I mean, he's kind of the complete fighter now, really. I don't. In the build-up to the fight, me and Matt were talking to me and Matt Macklin were talking to Matthew Hatton about it. And obviously you've been in there with him, with Alvarez, like quite a long time ago, but we said, you know, were you surprised that he's gone on to be what he is? And he just said no. And a pair of us, we couldn't really see. I felt a bit mean saying it, but given what Callum Smith has achieved, but I just couldn't see how he could beat him. I just couldn't. And he just did everything right, didn't he? Like everything he does is with a purpose. Like people talk about not wasting anything, and generally we're talking about not wasting punches, but he doesn't waste anything, like even a fraction of his movement, whether it's offensive, whether it's defensive, whatever it is. Everything is done for a reason, and everything it seems to have the desired effect. So I felt kind of, people were saying that the Callum Smith was a bit too passive and he should have done this and he should have done that, but I think you just always got to give credit to the winner rather than look too much at what the loser didn't do, because I'm sure he was trying. It was just
I was going to say. I mean, I think if people are saying that, I think it's discrediting. I mean, the excellent performance of Canelo was a bit like poetry in motion, really, wasn't it, from him?
Yeah, I just don't really see what else he could have done. I mean, and the thing is, when you're not the one in there, kind of like feeling the punches. I've spoken to fighters quite often where they've said, you know, I can see why people thought I should have been more aggressive and done more, but every time I tried something, I got hit. And it might not have looked like I was getting hit that hard, but I was. And it looked like it might be one of those, like every time you try something, you get punished. And you just think, right, so what am I going to do? What am I going to do? All you can do really there is just think, I'll just hang in and hope that something changes. It's a brilliant plan, but it's really all you can do, isn't it? Or you just think, I'll just swing for the fences and see what happens. But I mean, you're going to get knocked out if you do that. And that's a really easy thing for someone to advocate if you're not the person who actually has to do it. So I don't really think there was a lot he could have done, Callum, to be honest. And then, you know, the bicep was, but again, I think he did that to him, didn't he? That wasn't.
Yeah. He said that after the fight, doesn't he? It was a target in the end. It wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, do you two see anybody who can? I mean, I don't see anyone light heavyweight or below who can beat him. Like, people will say Beterbiev, and I get that. I think that he's probably got the best chance, but I still don't think he would beat him.
That's what sort of our next question was. You know, what do we want to see for Canelo? Do we think Triple G being 38, 39 for the trilogy can beat him? Can Billy Joe with his slick style beat him? Caleb Plant, like Bivol, Beterbiev. What can you see for 2021? And
I would quite like to see him try and clean up at super middleweight, because he's got 2 belts now and he can do those 2 fights. I'd like to see him fight a bit more. I don't see any. I know he's had 50 plus, but I don't see any reason why someone like him, as disciplined as he is, can't box more than twice a year. Like, why not? He doesn't need the money. We all know that. But if you can get these fights made, then just get them done, because I don't see Saunders or Caleb Plant causing him any problems whatsoever. So, given that I've just said that, people would argue, well, what do you want to see the fights for? So long as they don't take ages to make, then, you know, you can make a bit of history, become undisputed, because it's interesting when you look at the kind of difference between world level and sort of like elite fighters. And if you win a world title, then you're a world champion, and that makes you world level, of course. But that doesn't make you an elite level fighter. And you look at Canelo, and he is obviously an elite level fighter, and Caleb Plant isn't. You look at his record, and there's really not very much on it. And Saunders, there's really not that very much on his either. His fans would go crazy at that, but he's had 2 big wins against Andy Lee and against David Lemieux. They were both world level, but not elite level fighters. They're just not. And that was quite a long time ago. So I think if Saunders had boxed him in his next fight after Lemieux, so 3 years ago, it would have been a good fight. But I think now, I think Canelo would take him apart, to be honest. So if he could get it done at super middleweight, then the problem is, like, what do you do? Because I'm not sure he would really want to go back down to middleweight. If you listen to what his team say, 160, I don't think they really fancy it much. I don't think Golovkin could beat him now. I think they've gone in opposite directions since. I thought Golovkin won that first fight. I thought nobody will ever convince me he didn't win the first fight. The result in the second fight I was fine with, because I thought it could have gone either way. But I think since then, Golovkin's just got that bit older. Canelo's got that bit better. And I think that ship has kind of sailed, really. So I guess it would probably be, you know, chances are I'm at light heavyweight after that, and see what happened there.
Do you think realistically he may actually go up to fight the Bivol or Beterbiev? I mean, some people you can't criticise Canelo, you can't, but people who are criticising him are saying, well, maybe he did fight Kovalev at the right time, maybe he saw his chance in aging Kovalev, you know, who's got miles on the clock. Do you think that's what it was, just a one-off case, or do you think there's a real possibility we could see him fight the Bivol or Beterbiev?
Yeah, no, I think it could happen. I think it could happen, because even though he's had 50 plus fights and he's been a pro for 15 years, he still looks pretty fresh, and he still looks like he's getting better. So I don't see him wanting to stop boxing for another 5 years. So he's going to have to find someone to fight, isn't he? And why not those two? I mean, I think he definitely did get Kovalev at a good time, because Kovalev wasn't the Kovalev 3 or 4 years previously. But equally, tales of his demise, I thought, were fairly exaggerated. I mean, he lost the fights against Ward. One was razor thin. One was a very odd finish. Got beaten by Eleider Alvarez, but then beat him in the return. But everything again was kind of in Canelo's favour for that fight, wasn't it? Because he had to fight Anthony Yarde 9 weeks prior to that. That's just how that turned out, because he obviously needed the title, or Canelo wasn't going to be interested in boxing him. So I think he did get him at a good time. But, you know, I covered that fight, and I had him behind through 10 rounds, and I was doing it with Enzo Macaronelli, and he had him behind as well. And then he knocked him out, and you just think, right, well, you still got to chalk that up as a pretty significant achievement. People love to knock wins, don't they, in the aftermath of it. Oh, well, he was this, he was that, you know, he's drunk every day and all, you know, just exaggerate things wildly. But I mean, I suppose the shame for him really is that if he does box Beterbiev or Bivol, they're not really what you describe as big names. They're not really. They're really good fighters, but I mean, do you remember that Beterbiev-Gvozdyk fight? What a brilliant!
Yeah.
And it got practically no attention at all, did it? It wasn't even on TV over here. Yeah, I don't know. He's just kind of, he needs someone to come through and really, really emerge, I think, over the next 2 or 3 years. And there's every chance that somebody will. I hope they do.
Yeah, definitely. Andy, I want to touch upon next year, 2021, round the corner. Obviously, the first fight that we're really excited about on the boxing calendar is the Ryan Garcia Luke Campbell fight. A cracking division, really stacked. Do we think that's where we really find out about Ryan Garcia, if the hype is real?
Yeah, I think so, because I mean, he's done what he's needed to do so far, and he has had some good wins. He's had some impressive wins, and I do think the fact that people like to talk a lot about his social media following and all this does kind of mask the fact that he definitely is, I think, the real thing when it comes to actually being a boxer. I don't know how good he'll go on to be and what he'll go on to achieve, but there's no question that he puts the work in the gym. We were talking to Robert Diaz the other day, me and Matt, and he was saying, and I know he's his matchmaker and he's golden boy and he's not going to say different, but that's a real dyed-in-the-wool boxing man whose job is to spot talent. And he said, yeah, he's the real thing. And we've always known he is. And this has come quite soon, but we genuinely believe that he'll win and that it will stop him. When I heard that, I became slightly less confident in Luke Campbell, but I still think that Luke Campbell's the better of those two. Whether he wins or not, I'm not totally sure, because I mean, he could knock Ryan Garcia out. There are loads of things we don't really know about Ryan Garcia yet. Points win over there might be quite difficult, but it is a really good fight. It is. I really like that fight, and it's one of those ones where I'm kind of glad that I'm not doing it for once, because I really do want Luke Campbell to win a world title. I think he's definitely good enough. I mean, Jorge Linares and Vasily Lomachenko as 2 world title fights it doesn't get much harder than that. I mean, Linares at that point was right up there, wasn't he? And he very beat him. And I just think it would be a real tough one for him if he doesn't manage to get a world title. And if he loses to Garcia, then I think he does fall quite a long way back down the pecking order.
Yeah, I agree.
There's so many great fights for 2021, and are there any that, you know, obviously AJ Fury is the one, but you know, are there any others that spring to mind that you can't wait to see or hope get made in 2021?
I mean, hopefully one which should be pretty straightforward is Josh Taylor against Jose Ramirez. They're both top rank, so you can't see any reason why that won't happen. And maybe in the first half of the year, probably more likely to be in America, I guess, if they're getting crowds back. I mean, who knows whether we will now or not, or what's going to happen. It's hard to say. So that should definitely happen, because there's just nothing stopping it. And Jack Catterall's agreed to step aside and let it happen. So that's one I really, really want to see. I mean, I'm looking forward to, and it's a shame there's not going to be, I mean, it's pointless to say that it's a shame there's not going to be a crowd. We've been saying that for weeks, but I'm looking forward to Avanesian against Kelly. Like, I know that doesn't really resonate on the world stage, but just because it's been so long coming and all the stuff that's gone on around it. I mean, I was at that Sheffield show when it was supposed to happen. Then it all went off the night before, and Kelly was ill and all of it. And Avanesian's team were absolutely fuming. And Neil Marsh was saying all sorts, and Adam Booth was firing back. And then it was supposed to happen in March, and then it didn't. And, you know, I saw Adam Booth and Josh Kelly at the Golden Contract final not that long ago, and you know, they seem nice and relaxed and happy and bang up for it. But so's Carl Greaves, and so's Adam. You know, it's just, you know, the build-up's just been so long, and I think it genuinely, for Kelly, it is a massive, massive fight. You know, if he loses that fight, then he's got a problem. He's got a problem.
Yeah.
And he could really easily have not done it as well. I know he agreed to it the first time, and I know that if they jibbed that fight somehow, then he would have got absolutely slaughtered. But he'd have got absolutely slaughtered for a bit, and then people would have forgotten about it. So he could easily have not done this. I always thought he should do it, but he could. he could easily have slipped away from this one if he wanted to, but at no point does he really look like he wanted to do that. So yeah, I'm bang up for that. I think that'll be a real good one.
With AJ and Fury, Andy, do you think that the only thing, well, not the only thing, there's a million things that can stop it, but do you think both sides are waiting for fans to come back, or do you think there's potential it could happen even without fans?
I think if we can't get, I think with that situation, if it's going to be, I think what the promoters would say was that if they can't get a full capacity stadium here, then they will go and do it in the Middle East. They'll go and do it in Saudi Arabia, because that way they'll still make the money off it for themselves and also for the fighters that they would have made anyway. And that'll be a convenient, not excuse exactly, but kind of excuse to do it there and make the absolutely massive money, because otherwise I think they really do have to do it here if there are crowds. I mean, it'd be terrible not to do that fight here. But I think we're a way away from I mean, who knows, you know, like with full a full stadium, God, we could be a long way off that being possible. And whilst it isn't, then I think it'll go somewhere else. Which would be a shame. But I would rather they did it sooner rather than later. So I'd rather kind of sacrifice that just to get it happening, to be honest, because what we can't have is this not happening. You know, I do think sometimes we're a bit too down on boxing in terms of what we don't get, because we do get some really good fights, but it looks to me like Spence Crawford is one of those fights that probably isn't going to happen. And that's a total shambles, but it does look like it probably isn't going to happen. And you can't have too many of them, because otherwise casual observers will just look at boxing and just think, well, what is this?
Yeah,
we're just going to get the odd one, aren't you? But you can't have too many of them.
Same as Lopez and Haney, I think that's going to happen as well, you know, for the sort of undisputed sort of title as well. You know, that's another one I hope doesn't get away.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, the WBC franchise belt is a complete joke as far as I'm concerned, but I suppose you can't hammer the WBC too much, because they're only really doing what the WBA had already done. But Lopez is the undisputed champion, and Haney may as well be like WBC international champion or whatever, as far as I'm concerned. But it's still a good fight, though. It is still a good fight. I like Haney. I met him when he's been over here, and really interested in what they've done with his career, him and his dad, you know, and you know, the kind of quite a heavy Mayweather influence, and they've been very smart and very shrewd, and he does look really, really good. So that's definitely one you would want to see. I mean, that division, there's a lot going on, isn't there?
Yes. Yeah, it's very, very exciting division. Andy, last thing I want to ask you just before we sign off, we mentioned Teofimo Lopez there, which I think officially by the Ring magazine, along with Tyson Fury, has had the award. But if I had to ask you for your fighter of the year personally, who would it be and why for you, mate?
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of internationally, I think on the world stage, you would have to go with, I think they're good choices, Lopez and Fury. I mean, Fury's like, he's kind of like the ultimate big occasion man, isn't he? Because you look at his career, and actually, you know, this argument that him and Eddie Hearn, or Frank Warren and Eddie Hearn, have been having about resumes and all the rest of it. In terms of like a resume, Joshua's is deeper, but Fury's big wins are massive. Massive. Like the one against Klitschko was a while ago. So but the one against Wilder, the two performances against Wilder and the second one, because whatever people say about the first one, and like everybody else, I thought he won. It was a draw. That's what happened. The second one was just unbelievable. I mean, I was sitting there watching it, absolutely mesmerized by it, because I mean, he just destroyed him. I mean, I just couldn't. He was incredible. And then Lopez, just to beat Lomachenko, is nobody thought that was going to happen. Nobody thought he could do it, and he did beat him, and he beat him easily. I thought it was a real easy 116, 112. I don't really know how you could get much else, to be honest. So yeah, I mean, those two are right up there from that point of view. But you know, like a kind of domestic one, if you like. I've done a few of his fights from a while back, and a few people have probably picked him now. And it's great to see him get a bit of a shine. There's Maxie Hughes. You know, just just brilliant to see someone like that who's worked really, really hard, who's good, who's been in a lot of big fights, has lost a lot of big fights narrowly, always looked like he probably wasn't quite going to get there, a bit like Josh Whale. Josh Whale looked like he probably wasn't quite ever going to get there. And then when you see them kind of do it, it's brilliant. And those were 2 big wins. Those were 2 real big wins. And I just really hope that he gets a big fight off the back of that now, a big fight for some big money, because what's really interesting about the boxing since it's come back is, you know, if you're prepared to roll the dice and take a chance, then you can turn things around for yourself, or you can make things happen for yourself. It's you know, it's revealing character, isn't it? Because there are some fighters who don't seem to really want to fight, or maybe they don't want the fight that they're being asked to take part in because they think it's a little bit trickier than they would like at this point, whereas people are prepared to roll the dice. I've just enjoyed watching people like Jez Smith, Macaulay McGowan. I know Macaulay McGowan had 2 real hard fights, and
he's a brilliant character, isn't he, Macaulay?
Character, yeah, and it's just, you know, it's just good to see. It's good to see them. It's good to see them, you know, getting rewarded for being prepared to, just to take a bit of a chance, take a bit of an opportunity, and kind of reignite their career. Someone like Jez Smith is good. Like, he's a good fighter. He could go on and do something, definitely. It's just taken this to kind of, for them to get, you know, to kind of refocus and get a chance. I mean, it's been a really odd year, but there has been some good stuff. Well, I just think we all think it's gone on long enough now, but it would appear that maybe it's going to go on quite a lot longer. I don't know.
Andy, thanks so much for your time tonight. On behalf of myself and Ciaran and Southwest Boxing Media, we really do appreciate your time, mate. And have a good Christmas and New Year. We'd love to catch up in 2021.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, lads.
Yeah, have a good Christmas. Take care. Bye, Andy.
Cheers, boys. Bye.